All right, good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Larson, and I'm the Director of Content here at the International Institute for Analytics, and I'm your host for today's session. Welcome to today's webinar titled Analytics Maturity, Supply and Demand Harmony in the Information Economy. In case you are new to the International Institute for Analytics, or IIA as we like to call it, we are a research and advisory firm co-founded by Tom Davenport and CEO Jack Phillips. Our passion is helping enterprises improve their analytics maturity. We support our clients through a portfolio of analytics maturity assessments and expert advice. We develop strategic frameworks and tactical guides for practitioners, and we facilitate a non-competitive space for peer-to-peer exchange between data analytics leaders and key members of their team. Now, today's discussion is going to focus on IIA's assessment service line and the value of measuring and prioritizing enterprise analytics initiatives. So our clients come to us for unbiased insights and a range of perspectives from our network of independent analytics experts and practitioners. And today's discussion is a part of that effort, an ongoing series of webinars designed to highlight important concepts, trends, and strategies relevant to DNA leaders and their teams. For more information on our three service lines, please visit our website. You can check the link in the chat. All right, before we dive in to our talk today, let's go over a few housekeeping items. First, I'm excited to announce our webinar for next month, The Future of Data Engineering with Tarush Agarwal. Tarush was one of the first data engineers in Silicon Valley and a leading expert in data engineering. He's also a member of IIA's expert network, and he's going to help us kind of look around the bend in the data engineering space in May. Second, we released substantial updates to our analytics maturity transition guide, stage 1 to stage 2, to our research and advisory network clients. These updates are really a nice supplement to today's conversation. In the chat, you'll see two links. A link for our RAN clients to access the full brief, and a link for others on the call to download an excerpt as a thank you for joining today's session. Third, IIA released a flash survey on enterprise analytics adoption and performance, and we'd really be grateful if everybody on the line filled out this survey. As always, answers are anonymous. It will take 1 minute, and we'll share our findings to the larger analytics community in a blog next month. Regarding today's session, we want it to be interactive, and we encourage you to submit questions or comments via the chat window. We're going to do things a little differently today and open it up for Q&A about halfway through, and then again at the end of the session. A recorded version of this webinar will be available and emailed out after the presentation. All right, without further ado, we are delighted to welcome Jack Phillips and Chris Donovan as our featured speakers today. As I said, Jack is co-founder and CEO of IIA. When enterprise analytics was really in its infancy, Jack and Tom Davenport built a new way of supporting analytics leaders and their teams. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a person who's more passionate about the topic of analytics maturity and assessment. Chris Donovan, an old friend of IIA, is EVP and Chief Data and Information Officer at Medical Mutual of Ohio. Chris is a seasoned data and analytics leader in the hospital and healthcare industry, and one of our first subscribers way back in the day to our analytics maturity assessment, or AMA, which is our flagship assessment. And we're excited to get Chris's frontline take of applying the AMA at his organization. In today's webinar, Jack and Chris will discuss the value of assessing the analytics maturity of your enterprise on an ongoing basis, key concepts driving IIA's unique assessment methodology, and key actions data and analytics leaders can take to progress their analytics maturity journey. All right, welcome, Jack and Chris. Jack, I'll let you take it from here.
Jason, thanks a lot. Chris, really great to have you with me today. It's a treat to always have you with me. The last time we spoke publicly, I think, was episode 12 of the Leading Analytics podcast. You were good enough to join me and talk to me about what was going on in the COVID environment at Cleveland Clinic, where you were at the time. That was followed in 2020 by Cleveland Clinic winning the Excellence in Analytics Award that year, the Annie, which we are again awarding in October here of this year for all of you who are interested in submitting your interesting projects. So, Chris, it's been a while, and you've had a change in role. And, as Jason said, I just love this space. I love talking to experienced leaders. How's it going so far? Before we get into information economy stuff, give us an update on the new role and how things are going.
Yeah, thanks. First, let me just say thanks for having me. I always enjoy these conversations as well. The new role is going great. I've been here a little over 2 months now. Stayed in the healthcare industry, just moved from the provider side to the payer side. So it's been a really interesting transition. I keep telling people it's like I spent 30 years on the provider side. So it's like I speak Spanish and everyone here speaks Italian. So I kind of understand what they're saying, but some of the vocabulary seems different. So I'm just getting up to speed. It's a great organization, lots of opportunity here, lots of really good people, and real focus here on building data and analytics capability for the enterprise.
And of course, you didn't have to leave Cleveland. We've talked about sports forever. When you've been a member of the ALC for many years, and every time we get together, you talk about either the Cavs or football or whatever it is. But that was nice. You didn't have to leave Cleveland.
Exactly. Got to stay close to home. So it was a nice transition that way.
And as you've always said, suffer with the Browns. Is there something like that?
Yeah, that hopefully we're coming. Well, this is what you say every year. This year we have high hopes.
Okay. All right. Well, we could talk about sports all day. The reason you are so integral to this message, Chris, is that you will remember that you were among the first enterprises in your leadership at Cleveland Clinic to actually get your analytics maturity score. And almost to the month, it's been 9 years since we first actually assessed Cleveland Clinic and jumped forward. And obviously, I think you're enjoying an assessment now. You're benefiting from an assessment at Medical Mutual of Ohio. So you've really seen the full spectrum here. And, I'll say thank you, because you really were among the early folks who said, hey, measuring our maturity on a regular, consistent basis objectively is crucial to success. Still the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as I've done the assessments now kind of in different stages of maturity. So, 9 years ago at the Cleveland Clinic, we were kind of where we are now at Medical Mutual, which is really trying to understand organizationally, where are we? Where do people think we are? Where do people think, we have opportunities to improve? And I've been able to use the assessments in a number of ways. So where I am today at Medical Mutual, it's really about how do I start to attack, driving analytic maturity. And it's such a big ask, right? You're trying to move things across data, people, process, technology, it's culture change, it's change management. And really what I found the assessment to help with is we can identify where people think, we have opportunities, and the whole importance versus effectiveness kind of aspect of the survey really helps us identify where our own people see gaps.
Yeah.
And so what that helps me do is focus our efforts where they will see tangible benefit and get in their estimation, high return early on. And it really becomes like an accelerator in my mind, right? Because they're seeing that demonstrable value to things that matter to them.
Yeah, it's a great word. And let's hold on to that. It's a great word, accelerator. So today we're gonna talk about a couple of frameworks. We're gonna share a couple of frameworks. And I was talking to one of our experts, Mark Demarest, yesterday, and as much as when Tom Davenport and I started IIA, the A of course everybody knows that's on the call today, both our clients and folks that are not clients. So A obviously stands for analytics. But I've always thought, it could just as well stand for anthropologists, because we have for over a decade been studying high-performing enterprises and trying to dissect exactly what it is that makes them different. What do the high performers do through our methodology that we can expose for others? And that's kind of what we're going to do today. We're going to share with everybody. I'm going to as we jump into defining the information economy, which is the title today, I want to remind everybody also, take a look in the chat. We do have for research clients, so for Research and Advisory Network and ALC clients, there is a proprietary research brief on mapping and information economy in the library, which I encourage all of you to check out. Ryan is going to drop that link in the chat as we speak here. So be sure to use your ID to access that research brief as background. But that is, a few years out of date. And what I wanted to do today was really introduce 2 new frameworks and 5 principles. So I'm going to jump all the way to the end, give you the Cliff Note version of what we're going to cover. Then I'll show this again at the end. So 2 frameworks. The first we call the Information Economy Framework. And the second we call the Demand Supply Balancing Act Framework. We're going to go into these in detail. 5 principles that we'll walk through that I think are pretty interesting. Every firm is a unique information economy. Now, if you're asking yourself, do I have an information economy? That's the beginning point. Every firm is itself a unique information economy. We'll get into that. The second principle that we're going to focus on is what we've observed is demand side, whether it's clinicians in the healthcare space, business consumers in any other industry, business partners, always gets its needs met one way or the other. There's a cliffhanger here. The third is that world-class supply, that is huge, large data and analytics teams, data science teams, huge infrastructure in terms of data warehouses and tools and AI technologies, cannot deliver business value without the cooperation and collaboration of what we'll call the demand side. The fourth is that high maturity, then, what we're going to contend today occurs not when one or the other side of the information economy is excelling. It's about balance and harmony. And lastly, our underlying message is we have entered an era where every leader must objectively measure progress. It's an era of accountability. Must measure that progress consistently using a constant objective methodology. So you get nothing else, 2 frameworks you walk away with and 5 principles. So with that, Chris, let's dive into this. So the idea of an information economy, I know it may be a little bit confusing. So I'm going to take you back to your college Econ 101 days, and you heard terms like marginal cost and sunk cost and monopoly and globalization. But the piece that has stuck out for us at IIA is this idea of supply and demand. So you can remember that, when you took your course, you had those 2 curves, the supply curve and the demand curve. You had price on one axis and quantity on the other axis. And the theory was that economies tend to balance. They tend to eventually find equilibrium. And that concept has resonated with us as we've thought a lot about the balance in terms of what high performers are doing inside of data and analytics teams. So you've got sort of demand on one side, hungry consumers of data, of insights, of, in some cases, just pure automation in terms of decisioning. On the other side, you have what we'll call the supply side, right? This is the entire data and analytics program, however it's organized across geographies, across business units, across divisions. That's kind of, that's what we spend our time thinking about. So to jump into then this theory, Chris, I'm going to be kind of play-by-play today, but I'm going to pause often because I really would love to get your reactions from a real-world practical perspective to some of this theory. So if we think about this concept of supply and demand, you might actually volunteer the idea of data, right, and decisions, really balancing supply of data and insights and analytics, and then on the demand side, decisions, keeping it very simple. What we mean by that then on the supply side is the capacity, right, the number of data scientists, the number of analytics professionals, and on the right side, this idea of consumption. You've heard us and seen us write a lot about, hey, ultimately, consumption and adoption is the name of the game here. Capabilities on the one side, skills and expectations on the other side in terms of what we'll call the demand side. So keeping this sort of taking this theoretical framework and mapping it to data and decisions, let's just keep it simple for now. What we've discovered are three principles after, again, being good anthropologists and observing a lot of folks. The first dimension, right, which is that every firm is itself, by definition, has or is a unique information economy, right? And it's defined by, there are a set of mechanisms, there are a set of beliefs, there are a set of practices and processes by which information flows through, inside of, across, and within the organization. If you don't know what yours is, you need to. That's sort of principle number one for us.
And Jack, I
Chris,
would say you could even extend your analogy there to say that there's kind of a macroeconomic and a microeconomic,
great,
context to that. Like there's these large enterprise kind of things that are happening around your information economy, and especially in organizations that are not as mature, there's a ton of little microeconomic things where people are trying to figure out and make it work, and they're doing that independently in many cases. And so that interplay can also lead to complexity, to challenges, to really trying to understand how information moves around your organization, and really how you make decisions, right, to the right side.
Exactly, right. And we're fine. If you think about modern macro economies, you could generalize and say, well, you've got command control, sort of a Soviet era planned economy, and you have a more of a capitalistic, laissez-faire traditional economy that we're used to. That there are certainly firms that we work with who are command and control, but don't know they're command and control. Thoughts on that, Chris? I know you've seen a lot of different environments.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think sometimes you have to be command and control, regulatory compliance, safety, right? Issues like that. There are good reasons to have some of those policies and approaches. But the truth is, even if you're trying to do that universally, those little micro exchanges pop up inside of your command and control economy, right? Just like in the real world. So yeah, I think there's place for that, but you're really going to find a balance or a mix, I think, in every organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess our sentiment here is knowing it, being intentional about being a good anthropologist yourself as a leader or as a team, to really understand, based on your historic culture, based on the industry you play in, based on often the age of your company or your organization, knowing it, naming it, and understanding it is sort of step one. Second principle that we observe all the time in our assessment work, and as we work with our clients in the Research and Advisory Network and ALC, is that the demand will always, that is let's call it the business partner side, will always get its needs met one way or the other. And what we're really meaning here is they will either work with you as the supply side, or they will cope and potentially work around you. Chris, I know you've got a lot to say on this one.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, because they're trying to get their jobs done, right? So they're going to figure out how to get what they think they need. And I think that is an important, they're going to get what they think they need, right? And so there's also potentially a self-limiting factor there where, and I think this is where the assessment comes into play again, is they don't always understand the potential of what they could be doing, what other information, what other approaches, what other insights could be helping us make better decisions. And so that can be kind of a double whammy, because not only do you not have an efficient or consistent way of delivering it, there's kind of this self-imposed ceiling that you're putting on the organization if you can't understand the potential for new approaches to this.
Yeah. And then lastly, we see, again, so many companies who are saying, hey, competing on analytics, competing on data must be a game of just building a world-class supply organization. That is a world-class, both tech and skill-based programmer organization. And we can assume that then leads to high maturity and high performance. But in fact, what we see time and again is that world-class supply if you have it, cannot deliver business value without balancing, without the collaboration of demand. And I would say that, Chris, we've talked about this. When Tom and I started the business and we started to see the emergence of these analytics leaders, there was a race to assemble arms, if you will, right, on the supply side. And then I think about the modern leaders that I've interviewed for the Leading Analytics podcast, folks like you, who are now switching and getting this epiphany that, boy, being non-technical, right, is really the name of the game. And again, I know you get out a lot and talk to your clinical side partners, at least at the clinic side. But talk to me about this a little bit, Chris.
Yeah, I think that's a really important principle, because it's, in many ways, it's easier to build the supply side than it is to build the capability and change the muscles that you need to use new and different data and insights to make decisions differently. And so this is certainly something we learned, or I learned in my past, is that you can get really excited, you can invest in this, I can deliver just fantastic analytics, and if nobody uses them to make a decision, I'm just creating waste for the organization. So that the way you describe that in terms of value is really key, because you can develop world-class analytics and you'll deliver no value for your organization if the people on the right side making the decisions either don't, just won't use it, or don't know how. Right. And you haven't figured out a way to incorporate it into their workflows and into their processes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So 3 principles emerge as we introduce this idea of the information economy. The other thing that we've noticed then is what we want to introduce 3 disciplines. Traditionally, I think most leaders of analytics and board level folks think of 2 disciplines, but we increasingly are going to name out 3 unique disciplines. The first we'll call for simplicity data science, right? And that is, I think, what most folks on the phone today are very used to. Advanced analytics, depending on complex, high quality data, rigorous analytical methods. This is the side that we were just talking about, and there's nothing wrong with creating world-class capabilities there, right? And that is a foundation for sure. The second big, the sort of discipline, though, that we're seeing is what we would call decision science. Now, that fundamentally is about using that technology and those high-quality data to produce decision-making vessels, machines to support, supplant, potentially replace human decision making. And we articulate this differently from the technology, right? It is that decision point. And then I'm going to introduce all these 3, Chris, and then I'd love to have you, because you and I talked a little bit about, whether you thought these were right. And then lastly, this is kind of the big one that we're introducing, is what we call data sociology, right? So inevitably we're in now, you've heard IIA talk about sort of the 4 big eras, and we are in the automated era for sure. And so advanced analytics becoming embedded in what we'll call complex socio-technical systems that could inevitably, right, as user side, could produce some unintended consequences that certainly should be foreseen and managed. But Chris, as you think left to right here, do these seem right to you?
Yeah, I think those are definitely the right 3 domains. And I think for, a lot of times that third one that you have on there, people don't really consider or think about. And what I've seen is that without, there's all kinds of consequences in there. You could be talking about bias in your algorithms, like complex stuff like that. But you could also just be talking about people don't understand how to use some of these things, like I referenced earlier. And without that translation, and that's kind of like, I sometimes think of that almost in the middle of your data science and your decision science, you really risk just making bad decisions faster, potentially, right? Because you're not making that translation. You're not understanding some of the risk inherent in that. They're not understanding how to interpret these insights or this information. And again, it really what you're trying to do is you said it in the beginning, it's about how do we make better decisions as an organization and use data, information, analytics to do that. That sociology piece is huge to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I come back to adoption, broad, deep, rapid adoption. That's the goal, right? Ultimately, that's the goal. In whatever fashion, the output of the supply side, whatever form that takes. Nothing wrong with simplicity, nothing wrong with, non-technical solutions. So good. Okay. So we think of these as sort of the three orbs. And for us, then, the payoff, it really is ultimately, this is not a technical challenge. This is what we'll call a socio-technical challenge, right? Is taking into consideration the idea of data sociology, not forgetting that there is a technical component. We don't want to dismiss that. But I think this concept of bringing these two into balance, hopefully this sets up that understanding, because these worlds must operate in harmony, one without the other. We've said it, but they have to come. They have to come together. But I think, increasingly, there are three areas, certainly not just one, and not even two. I think as we progress here in terms of success for leaders, thinking like a sociologist is a required skill. We've published a great piece on the behaviors of the new leader of analytics, like you, Chris. And increasingly that list, Jason has, helped put that together, that the right side of that list is all about the socio side, right? And again, you're into a new role. I assume you're picking up a lot of that now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to get a good understanding of what is our information economy in this organization, right? And then understand, how do we make decisions today? And then figure out, what are my opportunities around that decision-making process? Because there's going to be, can I just help that process be better? And where do I think we need to try and drive a change in that process, right? So that that gets to that kind of imaginative ceiling issue that we talked about earlier, that sometimes just doing what we do better isn't good enough anymore. And data and analytics, the stuff on the left, can help drive a fundamental change in that. So that's right where I am, is trying to understand these components for us as an organization.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Chris, a good number of questions coming in. As Jason said, before we go on to the second of the two frameworks, let me grab a couple of these. Morgan Johnston is asking, Morgan Johnston, a classic question here. Any recommendations for an org like mine that struggles with aligning leadership to create the data-driven culture? This is fairly common. The bottom of the org, that is the group that many of you manage, understands the value, but leadership buy-in is slow and hindering the company's performance and talent retention. It's a big one, Chris. What do you think?
Yeah, this isn't dissimilar to some challenges I've had in my past. And I think what the approach that we took on that was, again, it kind of speaks back to that, the value of the maturity assessment, because what we found in the maturity assessment were pockets in the organization who had clarity around things that they thought were important that we struggled to do. We could identify those people in the organization and do targeted work to try and deliver value. And then what we built over time was kind of this coalition of the willing, right? So there's a group of people out there who are just waiting for someone to help them improve in this stuff. So we found those people, we identified their challenges, we delivered on those challenges. And now, instead of just me out there talking about the value of this, I've got another person that's alongside me, and then 2 and 4, and right. Yeah. And so we built that over time, so that we built this kind of groundswell. And then the messaging is going, not for me to my executive team, trying to convince them to do a top-down change. They're hearing it coming up through their channels, right? And those guys, or those folks that are on that team, are talking to one another, and maybe we're making progress in one area, another area is not adopting. Well, now you start to build some peer-to-peer conversations, right? So for us, it was really in that same situation, we had to find those, I always called it our coalition of the willing, which there is a horizon to that. Like, there's a limit to how far you can take the organization, but you can make a lot of progress from that bottom up approach.
Yeah. Coalition of the willing. I love it. Yeah, I love it. Making a note of that. Okay. Along those same lines, Chris, you've known we use the Delta model still as the core framework in terms of assessing maturity on this question of the L. L stands for leadership. If those of you on the phone aren't familiar with the acronym, and frequently we will see scores that come back from organizations where the D, data, and maybe the A, that is analysts or people, pretty high, the L low, the L lower. It's sort of a similar version. Are there, and I mean L, I mean CEO, board, if you're at a public company, we're trying to measure how much does super senior leader folk, how much do they actually walk the talk or just talk the talk? Any guidance for folks on, let's just take a CEO level, how you coach that person in terms of, sort of their outlook for data and analytics?
I think at that level, you have to focus on the value you're driving on the right side of this graphic here, right? They're not going to be, in my experience, largely interested in the technical aspects of delivering these kinds of capabilities. They're also, in many cases, the hardest people to drive change into because they've been in their career for a long time. They've obviously been successful. It's kind of the classic, what got me here won't get me there kind of approach. And so you really have to work with them to do change management efforts, right?
Yeah.
How do you get them to think differently? How do you bring and deliver value? And in my experience, it's always lead with value, because if they see that, then all of their natural instincts and their capabilities are going to lock in on it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can convince them to say, well, we can do more of this. And so it's a value conversation, not a capability technical conversation.
Yeah, no, it's great. Great point. Okay. Okay, we've got a few more here, but I'm in the spirit of time, I'm gonna keep moving us along to the second of the two frameworks that we wanted to share today. And here we're talking about the balancing act now with the introduction of the information economy framework, now the balancing act between the supply side and the demand side. So if you take that, a version of that diagram, that diagram I showed earlier, and instead of supply, we might use data analytics sort of capability supply side. On the horizontal axis where primarily you'd see demand, maybe we just use decisions for a minute. And what we see in terms of levels of maturity from the bottom of the vertical axis up through the top is moving from environments where there is simply no data and analytics, there is no supply, up through, data only, up through information products, analytical applications, and then, really kind of state of the art today, supplying embedded and automated analytics. So thinking of that from low to high on the supply side, on the demand side, no interest at all in using data to make better decisions. Some sort of rudimentary demand moving right to left for data. Hey, thanks, I'll just take the data and make my own decision. Demand for something a bit more sophisticated, we'll call them information products, but really what we're really talking about is BI here, reports and dashboards. Demand for more sophisticated decision support, predictive, prescriptive, and then finally, sort of decision automation and embedding. So think of those two axes from low to high, bottom to top, left to right. On the demand side, what we see frequently through a lot of the work that we do when we do an assessment through the free text commentary, is you can listen to the way demand signals, right? And actually diagnose where your demand side partners sit today, that you can kind of tell where they are on the spectrum from, listen, I don't really need anything to make decisions. I've been in this role for 30 years and I know the business. I know how to do my job without data, right? So I do need some data to make better decisions. Moving forward, then, actually, it would be helpful to see KPIs, metrics, dashboards, sort of this BI world, right? I actually would like to be told where the answer is. I'm moving now forward and would like to be told, led about where to focus, who to focus on. If you're thinking of a sales organizations, and I really don't want to wade through data. I just want you to tell me what to do, all the way up to the narrative that we're starting to hear more of, which is, gosh, I don't really need to be involved in the decision. Just make that decision for me and act. Now, this is what we talked about a little bit with unintended consequences. But Chris, love to get your view on this spectrum. Accurate? Is this what you've seen? Anything different?
No, I think it's really accurate. I think it's interesting because as you grow from left to right across the decision axis there, I think there's really different challenges to move from space to space. So, demand, if you're in that demand for data environment and you're trying to get to information products, I would argue your biggest challenge is they just won't trust you, because the reason they're doing what they do today is because there's no coherent approach. They can't get data. There's no standard definitions. They don't know what it means. So they don't trust data unless they do it, right? And so that I've tried to, grown through that in my past. And that is a huge lift in the organization to get them to just realize, okay, you don't need to do that work because we're going to do that on your behalf. Right. And then you can do the more valuable work of making the actual decision. Then to get from that point to demand for predictive and prescriptive, that's an education upskilling thing. Yeah. Because understanding because typically reports, dashboards, right? That's retrospective. Yeah. That's really easy for people to get their arms around and understand how to interpret that and how to use it to inform kind of future decisions. Forward-looking, probabilistic methods, predictive modeling, way bigger ask of people. And so there you're talking about like upskilling, education, teaching. And so it's interesting as you move to the right, the different challenges that you're going to find in the organization to actually achieve it.
Yeah. And this word trust comes to mind too, right? I mean, I've got my bonus to make if I'm on
That's right.
Do I trust the data? Do I trust that you guys are giving me decision automation that I can trust?
Right. And that final layer where you have to get people to is, I don't want to be involved, but where they do need to be involved is in managing the risk of making that decision in an automated way. Right. And so that's, again, another change, a very significant change in culture. Like, you can't just abdicate decision making. We can automate it. Yeah. But there's a different role that you have as a leader or a decision maker or a decision enabler, or whatever you want to call that term when you get to that level of maturity. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Let me move to the vertical axis then. Hey, and Bill Walters, thanks for chiming in. Really like the concept of supply and demand on the charts. Fantastic. We hit a chord. On the supply side, Chris, if we were to generalize here, bottom half, top half, what we commonly see is, we'll call it stovepiped project orientation. Repeat, stovepipe. And at some point then, analytics teams cross over the transom to a more product-driven, reusable methodology, a managed platform orientation, not stovepiped, not do it the same way over. In other words, repeatability. It is probably a resonance on the phone here, but I don't know. Does this make sense? Does this seem right?
Yeah. And I think it speaks back to that kind of maturity across the bottom, because first people might let you help them, build their own data sets, but they still don't really trust you in the whole, right? So you might end up doing stovepipe work for them. But as that trust grows, then you can move up that axis. Yeah. Right. And it's you have to move on both of these axes at the same time.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Perfect. So then now let's bring the two axes in together, and in a classic kind of 2x2, in the lower left, you have low capability supply, but you also have rudimentary and simple demand. We see this often. What we see more often, as I referenced earlier, is large investment on the supply side, high capability supply, but demand not keeping up in terms of sophistication. Let's call that simple demand. Okay. Then obviously, sort of finish this metaphor out. users who have super high expectations, complex advanced demand, but low capability supply, and then imbalanced high capability supply and complex demand. When you think about your own organization and how imbalanced you are, the idea would be that as you move out, to paraphrase, Chris, what you just said here, that as you move incrementally across each of these axes that you're staying in balance. When you don't, you end up with situations where in the upper left, you have what we'll call oversupplied characteristics or demand underflow, where you have a whole lot of activity going on that is just not penetrating. It's just, it's just that it is oversupply, overinvestment, it's inefficient. On the other side, you have, back to the word I used earlier, that is undersupplied or demand overflow. You have coping, you have demand getting frustrated and finding their nearest outsourcing company and doing it themselves. And then that ends up on the supply side with a lot of folks managing outsourced contractors rather than doing real work. Comments here, Chris?
Yeah, and I think it'll be really interesting to see as you guys track how organizations mature, like kind of how how the different paths they follow here, right? Like how many curve up to being really good on supply and then move to the right.
Yeah.
I think this view is really at that macro level that you talked about. This is the organization as a whole. You can move areas, independent areas in different ways, right? So they could get really good and move across the decision axis before you catch up from an enterprise data and capability perspective, but they're only doing it in a very small area. Yeah. So yeah, I think this is totally logical, and it'd be fascinating to see how different companies mature across this.
Yeah. And so we get questions all the time in terms of, all right, what do I need to do on the supply side? We use the word skills and capabilities, but capabilities in particular, sort of in terms of maturing, what do I need to do along the demand side? Fix cultural dysfunctions, often upgrade consumption skills, not data science skills. So moving those two in coordination, I think is commonly what we see. But to your point, we will, to use, many of you are on the phone and our assessment, you will have our assessment instrument sort of exposes this. You can have ATTA, analytics, technology and techniques scores, running a point or so higher than, say, the AMA scores. That is the demand, more of the demand side. And so we see this a lot. And I think you've raised an interesting question. If you, like you have, Chris, think about this over, I don't know, I'll pick a 10-year rate. Where do you make gains? And in other words, it doesn't happen. You're not in full balance all the time. And so you're constantly having to sort of move up the curve. But when all is said and done, you can kind of qualify or quantify where you are in really simple terms, simple demand and really simple supply. Hey, there's probably a real cultural barrier here to the power of data and analytics to transform the organization. In the upper left, you got, I'll make it up, 300 data scientists, but no, sort of the craziest toys you can imagine, but really the basics aren't really there's no demand for any of that, and the basics really aren't being met. In this quadrant, as I mentioned, you've got, a lot of siloing happening, sophisticated analysts in, say, marketing or other areas, maybe it's in human resources, but it's a very much of a do-it-yourself environment, or you're managing a whole bunch of expensive integrators on the outside. And ultimately, then when things are in balanced, but you also have to sort of keep track of uneven penetration. You mentioned this earlier. So, you find, a question that's come in here is, from a budget perspective, do I feed the highest performing areas, or do I try to bring the lowest performers up? And which is a question you and I've talked about, Chris, but I'd love to get your view because of this uneven penetration when you do get to balance in the upper right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because you could almost argue the worst place to be might be right in the middle, where I've got siloed areas that are really good at this and they're kind of far down to the bottom right. And I've built an enterprise program that's not being utilized. So I've got this stuff in the upper left, right?
Yeah.
So I think, as I look at this, one strategy, and it comes back to that coalition of the willing, is find those people that are in the bottom right and deliver the top left to them.
Yeah.
Right. Because then you're going to move both of those in conjunction up towards the top right for the organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think that we don't need no machine learning. I love that don't underestimate that trust factor.
Yeah.
Right. To get from demand to, because part of the reason they don't think they want it is because they just don't believe it. They didn't do it themselves. They've never been given any reason to trust data from a corporate team or an enterprise team. And even if you do it, they're going to redo it.
Yeah.
Because they just don't believe it. Right. And so I like how you said that earlier, that those are I think you called them cultural and capability factors. I think that's really important. That took me a long time to figure out that, like, well, here, look, I'm giving you this great data. Why aren't you using it?
Right.
And it finally took a very open, peer of mine to just say, because I just don't believe it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I've never been given any reason to trust it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's a huge barrier sometimes.
Yeah. Interesting. It makes me think, questions come in here. I'm gonna take a little bit of a pause for a second and ask you a common question we're getting here, which is, why is that? And I think it's related to this. Why is the tenure of chief analytics officers and chief data officers, we're seeing it come down? And we talk to folks, and sometimes they get into an organization thinking they're perhaps a little further up toward the right, only to find out upon arrival that in fact they are firmly in lower left. And the culture is so brittle that the ability, there is no ability to sort of curate and amplify demand. I don't know. It seems like this might relate. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would think one of the things that's, I don't know if it's unique to this kind of C-suite role, but it's definitely true, is that it's an area that you absolutely cannot be successful on your own.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how good you are at this, how well-intentioned, what your skill sets are. It gets to that cultural, demand decision access. If people aren't using it, you're not going to drive change. And I think there's so much excitement and buzz and still interest in, we want to be a data-driven organization. We want to use advanced analytics, right? And I would suspect in a lot of places that a chief analytics or data officer comes in and 2 years later or 3 years later, they haven't seen the kind of radical change that they were hoping for with that position. Right. And and sometimes maybe it is that person, but in many cases, I'll bet that's due to the cultural changes have been so hard.
Right.
And they have not gotten that buy-in, and other leaders don't think it's their job.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, that's just, there's no evidence to back that up. It's just my own experience,
exactly.
But
yeah, so it's hard and it's about change management.
Right.
It is hard, but the rewards are hearty and real. And often it is not about left vertical axis. It is much more around change on the horizontal axis. So
exactly.
That's helpful. All right. So folks, again, we want to keep it simple today, and I want to just to quickly flash up two frameworks. Hopefully you found them useful. Our information economy, our demand supply balancing act, 5 principles. I won't go through them, but I'm going to leave you with kind of the 5th principle here, which is what we're seeing is that the highest performers are actively sort of measuring where they stand on a periodic, regular basis. And I thought I would take a quick minute for those of you who are not part of the IAA research community. You're not a client of IAA's, but you may be thinking about how do I run an assessment? Essentially, we have 2 acronyms. One is called the Analytics Maturity Assessment, the AMA, and that, as I mentioned, aligns very much with this decisions and demand side. And the ATTA, the Techniques and Technology Assessment, very much on the data side. We put those together in terms of balance. There are other assessments that we've been developing over the past 24 to 30 months here which are getting a lot of attention as well. So a common question we get is, can I just inventory the skills that I have around the organization, both in my team and outside my team? Can I actually put a quantitative measure, an inventory of some of the decision-making skills? Is there a data literacy component to this that I could actually measure? And then the big one is the DDCI, the culture inventory. And what we've tried to do at IA is to take these somewhat qualitative notions and put a quantifiable instrument against it, so that you can actually take something that is measurable, that seems immeasurable, and actually take it, as you said, to leadership with a quantitative measure. So the last thing I wanted to do today was that we're proud that we've actually just released a new version of this assessment tool. Chris, you'll remember 9 years, well, you've been doing it since then, but largely we've been kind of hamstringing it a bit with not modern tools. And we've now invested in a data platform that is going to drive these assessment scores, because many of you are interested in knowing not only where do I sit today, but where do I rank relative to my peers. So you're getting some early views here of screenshots from our now online version, our data-driven version of the assessment tool. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it gives you a sense for the kind of specificity and precision that we use when we're evaluating. I mentioned the Delta score earlier. A couple of things that, as you think about, all right, I know my score, what do I do about it? What are the opportunities? Where am I overinvested, correctly invested, or perhaps underinvested? The tool goes about that in a pretty precise fashion. And one of the things that we just released, which I'm really proud of, and Chris, I'd love to get your view on this. One of the things we do is to try to collect, obviously, quantitative data, but the qualitative data, the free text comments that we collect from around the organization is just gold. So we've now taken, obviously, some sort of traditional basic analytical techniques and tried to put some of this analysis down on a heat map. Chris, you and I have talked about the value of seeing actual quotes and these kinds of heat maps. I don't know, thoughts here?
Yeah, I think what it does is it gives you that translation tool, right? Because when things are summarized into the Delta scores and the categories, people can mean a lot of different things in the way that they respond to those. And this is part of a maturity thing too. And we learned this over time, is that people answer the questions based on what they think they mean.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of time in my prior organization trying to educate the organization around a common understanding of how the assessment worked. I think we took it 3 or 4 times there.
Yeah.
And what that did for us was it really helped us get more aligned on where we had opportunities, because we all meant the same thing when they were responding to it. The free text responses help you do that, right? So you can read those and you can start to get some understanding of, oh, I see, because if now you can get the survey, like the one that we just took here at my new organization, you can get a lot of detail about where, what different areas, their scores, what their responses were, and you can really start to pinpoint what they meant with some of their scores and the responses, which again, for me, it's all about how are you building an action plan out of this? And so that helps you refine and be much more rifle shot instead of kind of shotgun approach on this stuff.
Yeah, right. Fantastic. Okay, good. Well, that's sort of what we've, ultimately that's what we're trying to achieve here. So again, message to many of you, our clients that are on the phone with us today. You haven't done an assessment recently. We've got some, I think, a really exciting platform now that will help you. And if you haven't looked at this, I would encourage you to do it, because we think we really have become kind of the industry standard worldwide in terms of the data set we own and in terms of our leadership in this area. So, Jason, I know we've got about 5 minutes left. Chris, a good set of questions here in terms of, let me see here, frequency. Robert Cathy, thanks for chiming in. I can totally relate to the cultural challenge. Robert, client of ours, fantastic. Good to hear from you. That is the work here. It is the work. Chris, frequency, a question around frequency. You and I have talked about how often how quick is change? You talked about change over time, and therefore how frequently should we actually be pulsing the organization to measure progress?
Yeah, I mean, that might be a little bit different at each organization. For us, about a 18 to 24 month, 18 to 36 months, somewhere in there was where we found it to be comfortable, enough time to actually have absorbed the responses, developed an action plan, and acted on them so we could see the change. Earlier on, I think we did it a little bit more frequently because we were doing a lot of that education. Yeah. And I may be misremembering, Jack, but I believe our second score actually went down a little bit, but we had anticipated that and communicated that to the organization, because we said when we took it the first time, it was that imaginative ceiling issue. People thought we're really good at analytics, and they were talking about dashboards and BI. Right. As we then spent time educating the organization on some of the possibilities, they started to realize, actually, we're not as good as I thought we were. So my score is going to change. And so early on, we tried to do it sooner because we wanted to see if we were having that effect. And then you got to do it with some frequency to keep refining the program, right? Was it effective? And are you seeing new areas of opportunity emerge? I'll also put a plug in. It's more valuable the more places that take it, because one of the things I really value from IAA and the assessment, I don't want to just be measuring against myself, and I don't want to just be measuring against peers in my own industry. Right. The cross industry, the leaders cohort, the other comparisons we can set some aspirational targets and goals out of it as well. So the more people that take it, the better that information is, and the more you can bring back and learn to your own organization. So it's kind of a selfish plug for other people to engage in it.
Well, and you've hit our vision, right? Our vision is we want to benchmark, we want to assess the world, right? So that because you and I used to say, well, at Cleveland Clinic, hey, high performance, sort of top of the heap in terms of your cohort. But you'd always ask me, well, what are the retailers and financial services folks doing though? What can I learn from them? Right. Which I think is crucial. So last quick question that looks like it's come in from Bulgaria, if all places. Do we work with universities? We absolutely do. Public institutions, private institutions, higher ed, government. Yeah, we work with all those industries. Jason, you're back. I think we're out of time.
I am back. Yeah, that was great. That was excellent talk. Really appreciate your insights, Chris and Jack. And thanks everyone who joined the call today and asked some great questions. So if you're interested in learning more about IIA's analytics maturity assessment or the other assessment products in our portfolio, the link just dropped in chat will take you to that brochure. Drop us a line. It's a topic we obviously care about, and we're always here to chat. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar in an email tomorrow, and it will also be available on our website. Stay tuned on our email and social channels for upcoming blogs, webinars, ebooks, and other content. And have a great rest of your day, everybody. Remember, progress, not perfection. All right, be well.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.